Well, welcome back. This is session number 4. I can't believe how fast time goes by. We have 24 sessions and this is already number 4. Unbelievable. The week goes very quickly at Anchor. So what we're going to study in this class is beginning on page 36. Page 36. And we're going to take a look at 3 perspectives of the last 3 plagues. 3 perspectives of the last 3 plagues. But let's have a word of prayer before we do. Father in heaven, we thank you for the way that you have led us so far in this class. We've studied wonderful things. You've given us so much light about what is going to take place so that we can prepare a character that will withstand the tremendous trials ahead. I just ask, Lord, that you will continue to bless our study, that you will inspire us, that you will strengthen us to live the life that you would have us live in this wicked generation. Help us, Lord, to be lights in the world, that many might be saved. And thank you for the privilege of prayer and for answering us, because we ask it in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. Okay, perspective number 1 on the last 3 plagues is, of course, in Revelation 16 and verses 10 to 21. There you have a description of the last 3 plagues in the Bible. So let's read Revelation 16, 10 and 11, where plague number 5 is described. It says there at the bottom of the page, "Then the 5th angel poured out his bowl," now there are certain elements that we want to underline, "on the throne of the beast." So throne and beast. "And his kingdom became full of darkness." So throne, beast, darkness. "And they gnawed their tongues because of the pain." So you find the effect of the first plague, which was sores, is still there under the 5th plague. So that shows that they're cumulative. And what did the people do? How did they react? They blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and did not repent of their deeds. So there are several important components that we find in these verses. First of all, the throne of the beast. Secondly, the kingdom of the beast. In the 3rd place, darkness on the kingdom of the beast. And in the 4th place, sores and the gnawing of the tongue. Now, the only way we can understand these elements is to understand who the beast is. Because we find that it's the throne of the beast, the kingdom of the beast, darkness upon the kingdom of the beast, and the beast, the members who are the people who are members of the beast are gnawing their tongues. So central to this is the beast. So who is this beast? Well, we're on page 37. The beast under the 6th plague is the same beast of Revelation chapter 13 and verses 1 through 10, and Daniel 7, where this beast is spoken of as the what? As the little horn. You know, the little horn spoke blasphemies against the Most High, persecuted the saints of the Most High, thought that it could change times and law, and ruled for 1,260 days, which are really years. So who is the beast that we find here in the 5th plague? The beast represents the papal system, not the Catholic Church. The church aspect is not the beast. The beast is the papacy, which is the combination of church with the state. So we've identified the beast. It's the same beast of Revelation 13. When the Bible says the beast, it refers to the harlot or the beast representing the papacy. Now, where would the throne of the beast be? Because this plague falls on the throne of the beast. Where is the center of government of this beast, of the papacy? It is where? It is in Rome. It's the governing see of the beast. It would be in Vatican City, and the confines of this kingdom are found in the city of Rome. What is the beast's kingdom? The beast's kingdom represents all of its followers. Remember that the kingdom is not speaking about geography, it's speaking about the number of followers. Just like the kingdom of Christ is composed of the followers of Christ, the kingdom of the beast is composed of all of those who have worshiped the beast, his image, and have received the mark. How do we know that this beast is global? The kingdom of the beast is global. Well, notice the next three passages that we find on page 37. Speaking about this beast, which is the same as a little horn, I saw one of his heads, that is, of beast's heads, as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all of Fresno. Just wanted to make sure you were awake. Fresno, too. How many people actually marveled and followed? All the world marveled and followed the beast. So what is the kingdom of the beast? It's global. Revelation 13, verse 7, underlines the same truth. It was granted to him, that is to the beast, to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given him over, how many? Every tribe, tongue, and nation. So will the beast's kingdom be a global kingdom? Yes. Will Christ's kingdom be a global kingdom? Yes, because God's people will be found everywhere on planet Earth. Notice Revelation 17, verses 1 and 2. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came to talk with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot, who sits where? On many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." What do the waters represent upon whom the harlot sits? Once again, the harlot is a global system that rules over the whole world, because Revelation 17, verse 15 says, "Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues." So is the kingdom of the beast global? Yes. So when the darkness falls on the kingdom of the beast, is it a global darkness that falls all over the world? Absolutely. Now, the darkness that afflicts the throne of the beast and his kingdom is supernatural and global. When the darkness falls upon the throne of the beast system, those who belong to it, what do? They gnaw their tongues in pain. Even further, something happens, and that is God sends upon them a panic that leads them to kill one another with weapons they intended to use for the destruction of God's people. When we get to Ellen White's concept, we're going to see this even clearer. In other words, up to this point, they were going to use the weapons for what? To destroy God's people. But when the darkness falls upon the earth, suddenly the weapons are not used against God's people. They're used against those who deceive them to be on the wrong side of the issue. Zechariah 14, 12 and 13 points to this period. "And this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the people who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall dissolve while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets, and their tongues shall dissolve in their mouths. It shall come to pass in that day that a great panic from the Lord will be among them. Everyone will seize the hand of his neighbor and raise his hand against his neighbor's hand." Are you catching the picture? When is the captivity of God's people turned by God? It's at the moment of the fifth plague. When darkness falls on the kingdom of the beast, Everyone says, now wait a minute. We were supposed to be the righteous people, and they were the wicked, but they're in light and we're in darkness. What's going on here? And they realize, they suddenly wake up to the fact that they have been deceived by the religious leaders, and they return on them. Let me ask you, why would the sores be in their tongues? What do you use your tongue for? We use our tongue to talk. What have they been teaching? What has the kingdom of the beast been teaching? It's been teaching falsehoods. And that's the reason why the plague afflicts the tongue. And of course, you notice it says they did not repent. That indicates that those who belong to the kingdom of the beast are irreversible. Their condition is irreversible. Nothing in the world is going to change their point of view. Now we have the sixth plague. Revelation 16, 12, and 16. Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates. I want you to notice the words that are underlined. Those are the ones that we're going to focus on. And what happened with the river Euphrates? Its water was dried up. With what purpose? So that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. And then we'll jump down to verse 16, and you're going to see why a little bit later on in this series. And they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Har-Mageddon. Now, what are the central elements in these verses? First, the river Euphrates. Secondly, the drying up of the waters of the Euphrates. Third, the kings from the east. Fourth, the gathering of the wicked. And they gather to a place that in Hebrew is called what? Har-Mageddon. Those are the elements that we need to take a look at. Now, let's ask some important questions about the sixth plague. What is the symbolic meaning of the great river Euphrates? We're dealing with symbols, right? What does the great river Euphrates represent symbolically? The next question is, what is the symbolic meaning of the drying up of the waters of the Euphrates? The next question, who are the kings that come from the east? These must be the Chinese. You know, people who are superficial, they say, well, the Chinese are east, so this must represent the Chinese. That's a superficial way of studying Scripture. The next question is, how is the way prepared for the arrival of the kings from the east? We've noticed that it's drying up of the waters that prepares the way. And finally, where is the gathering place called Har-Mageddon? Now, we're not going to look at all the details here, because in our next lesson, we're going to amplify what we're studying now. So let's go to the Old Testament background for what we find in these verses of Revelation 16, verse 12, and verse 16. We have to go back to the Old Testament root. And that root prophecy is found in the fall of ancient Babylon, described in Daniel chapter 5. This story is told in Daniel 5, Jeremiah 50 and 51, Isaiah 41, and it's also helpful to notice the writings of the secular historians Xenophon and Herodotus, because they describe how ancient Babylon fell. So here is the composite picture, everything put together. Babylon sat upon the many waters of what river? Of the Euphrates River. Although the Euphrates River was Babylon's greatest source of security, because as long as the river flowed, they had water to drink and they could produce agricultural products in the city. You know, armies could come and besiege the city, and the city was safe because it had 3 walls. It was invincible, according to the Babylonians. It was the greatest source of authority, its river, but it was also its greatest potential liability if the waters should be dried up. Now here's an important detail. On the night of its fall, Babylon was practicing what? Idolatry. You can read it in chapter 5 of Daniel. And false worship. And they were drinking what? Wine. They were drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. In Revelation chapter 17, do we have a harlot that gives wine to the nations? Yes. And what is her name? Babylon. Is she the head of false worship and idolatry? Yes. Daniel 5 is in the backdrop. Now what happened on that night? Cyrus was the general of the Medo-Persian armies. Of course, the king or the leader was Darius, or Darius as people call him. Cyrus came from his armies from the north and from the east and surrounded the city. North and east is very important because Revelation, the kings come from where? From the east. Now Cyrus didn't come by himself. He came with many kings, if you read chapter 50 and 51 of the book of Jeremiah. He came with many kings. And the Medo-Persian troops dried up the riverbed of the Euphrates, diverting it to channels that had been built outside the city so that when the river was at flood stage, the water would go down through the channels instead of going through the city and flooding the city. In their drunken stupor, according to these two Greek historians, Belshazzar and his courtiers left open the brass gates that protected the city. And so Cyrus and his armies dried up the waters of the Euphrates. They entered through the dry riverbed, and the city fell without opposition. They entered unopposed. In fact, many of the population in the city actually were very happy to see Cyrus come in because Babylon had become very oppressive. And then Cyrus gave a decree for God's faithful people to leave Babylon and go back to Jerusalem. Interesting scenario, which forms the backdrop to the story of Revelation chapter 17. The entire scenario is applied symbolically and globally in Revelation 17. At this point, we're only going to consider some of the details of Revelation 17. We're going to study the chapter in detail later on. So let's ask some questions about Revelation 17, generally speaking. Which of the 7 plague angels came back to speak with John in Revelation 17, verse 1? It says one of the angels that had the 7 last plagues came back to speak with John in the very next chapter, 17, verse 1. The question is, which of the 7 angels came to talk to John? It has to be angel number 6, because the 6th angel dries up the Euphrates. In chapter 17, the harlot Babylon sits on many waters, and the waters of Babylon were the river what? Euphrates. So here, chapter 17 is an explanation of the 6th plague. Are you following me or not? Next question. What does a harlot represent in Scripture? Next, what is the name of the harlot woman? What are the waters upon which the harlot sits? And eventually, what will the kings and waters end up doing to the harlot? Let's read the passage, Revelation 17, verses 1 to 5, and then verses 15 and 16. And you'll notice that I've included explanatory comments in brackets. That's not part of the text. It's so that we can understand it better. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls. Which of the 7? Angel number what? Number 6. Because number 6, drying up of the Euphrates. And in Revelation chapter 17, the harlot is sitting upon the many waters of the Euphrates. So we know it's number 6 that's going to add an explanation to the 6th plague. So then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment." A better translation is the condemnation of the great harlot. Who does the harlot represent? It represents the papacy, the same thing as the beast. And it says, who sits on many waters. What were the waters upon which ancient Babylon sat? The Euphrates. And it continues saying, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication. In other words, she gets the rulers of the world to impose her what? Her agenda. Is that what Francis is doing these days? Absolutely. And it says, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. What does wine represent? It represents false doctrines. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet. Good papal colors, aren't they? You'll never find them wearing blue garments, because blue is a sign of God's law. So it says, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations, and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, mystery what? Babylon the Great. So what river did Babylon sit on? The Euphrates. And so we know that this is an expansion of plague number 6, which deals with the drying up of the Euphrates. So it says, on her forehead a name was written, mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. So must she have daughters? You know, I haven't known the first mother that doesn't have children. I know women who don't have children, but I don't know a single mother who hasn't had children. And so she has daughters that do her bidding. The mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Then he said to me, by the way, this is spiritual Babylon, right? The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. What does the Euphrates represent upon which the papacy sits? They're not literal waters. They represent the multitudes that she controls, that she rules over. Verse 16. And the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot. Are the political leaders of the world going to turn against her? You know, they admire her now. I mean, there's not a political leader in the world that doesn't think that Pope Francis is the greatest thing that ever happened to Christianity. But they just don't see that the papacy is like a chameleon. You know what a chameleon is? It's a lizard that changes color according to the environment where it sits. Let me ask you, if the Antichrist was a person who said, I'm an atheist, I'm against God, how many Christians would believe that? No Christian would believe that. But if an individual comes claiming to represent a Christian system and fights in favor of the poor and free immigration and says we need to take care of God's creation, everybody says, wow, this guy is an emissary of God. But they don't realize that behind the veneer, behind the makeup that the harlot has and all the jewelry that the harlot has, stands a system that, according to the Bible, is filled with abominations and with fornications. So it says, the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot. You remember what happened to Haman, who plotted against the Jews? He ended up in the gallows, didn't he? You know, this is a common phenomenon. Who died in the fiery furnace? Those that cast the 3 young men in. Who died in the lion's den? Those who threw him in. See, that's in the backdrop of what we find here. So the 10 horns are her supporters that will turn against her, and they're going to be really angry at her, because it says they make her desolate, naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. That's a way of saying that they're really going to be angry at her. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill His purpose, to be of one mind. By the way, are they going to be of one mind with the papacy for a period of time? Yeah, absolutely. God has allowed this. You know, God says, let them be on the same page. Were the Babel builders on the same page for a while? Yes. Ellen White says that the tower had reached to the clouds. And God allowed it. God said, okay, go ahead, build. But when it reached a certain point, God said no further. They were of one mind until God intervened. And so, this says that all of the religious leaders of the world, along with the political leaders of the world, will all be on the same page until a certain moment of time. To give their kingdom to the beast until a certain point of time. What is that time? Until the words of God are fulfilled. What are the last words that God utters to deliver his people? The seventh plague, when God said, "It is done." They're going to be united until the seventh plague, when God says, "It is done." Are you with me or not? Amen. Now let's go to plague number 7. This is the bottom of page 41. "And the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, 'It is done.'" This is the last word of God. Of course, the last word of God before the millennium. It's not that God isn't going to speak anymore. We're going to see him face to face in the kingdom come. Verse 18, "And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such a mighty and great earthquake as had not occurred since men were on the earth. Now the great city," what is the great city? Babylon. In what condition? By the way, you know what the three parts of Babylon are? The dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. The dragon represents the kings of the earth. The beast is the papacy, and the false prophet is apostate Protestantism. So were they united until this point? Absolutely. But now something happens to this threefold union, because it says, now the great city, Babylon, was what? Divided. Before they were what? United on the same page. Now they are what? Divided. And it continues saying, "And the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon was remembered before God, to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath." Those are the same words that appear in the third angel's message, right? And they also appear in Revelation 19, verse 15, when Jesus comes on the white horse. Then it says, "Then every island fled away, and the mountains were not found." This is predicted at the end of the sixth seal in Revelation 6, 14 to 16, also Revelation 20, verse 11. "And great hail from heaven fell upon men, each hailstone about the weight of a talent. Men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, since that plague was exceedingly great." So that's the last three plagues. The key ones are darkness, the drying up of the support of Babylon, and the wicked avalanching themselves against the system that deceived them. And then you have in the seventh plague, you have, it says here, lightnings and thunder and hail falls from heaven, etc. You have these phenomena. Now let's go to a fascinating story, the second perspective, the second Old Testament backdrop to the plagues. Exodus 14 and 15. This is really fascinating. As we saw in perspective number 1, the fall of Babylon in the days of Belshazzar is in the background of the 5th, 6th, and 7th plagues. However, I want to suggest another story in the Old Testament that also stands in the background. The story of the Exodus of Israel from Egypt. We know that there is a connection between these two stories. You say, how do we know that there's a connection? Because after Israel was on the other side of the Red Sea, after the Red Sea dried up, hello, what did they sing? The Song of Moses. Immediately this tells us, Song of Moses and of the Lamb. What's going to happen in the deliverance at the end is typologically already fulfilled in the first story. Now let's go to the top of page 43. Israel was in bondage in Egypt to the great dragon. Do you know that Pharaoh is called the great dragon in Ezekiel 29 verse 3? So Israel was in bondage. God promised to deliver them from bondage. And in order to accomplish his purpose, what did God send? God sent plagues to persuade Pharaoh to let his people go. But what happened with each plague? Each plague was saying to Pharaoh, let my people go, and the phrase is used many times there in Exodus. What happened with Pharaoh? Instead of letting the people go, he got angrier. Is that going to happen at the end of time? Absolutely. Now, one of the key points was the issue of Sabbath observance, even in the Old Testament story. Remember when Moses said, let God's people go into the wilderness for 3 days to worship the Lord? He was actually saying, let us go and keep the Sabbath. And the Egyptians had noticed that. Notice Exodus 5, verses 4 and 5. Then the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people from their work? Get back to your labor. And Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them, what? Shabbat. You make them rest from their labor. In other words, Pharaoh understood that Moses was saying, the people want to go out into the wilderness to rest, to experience a Shabbat. Ellen White caught this nuance. In Patriarchs and Prophets, page 258, she wrote, in their bondage, the Israelites had to some extent lost the knowledge of God's law, and they had departed from its precepts. The Sabbath had been generally disregarded, and the exactions of their taskmasters made its observance apparently impossible. But Moses had shown his people that obedience to God was the first condition of deliverance, and the efforts made to restore the observance of the Sabbath had come to the notice of their oppressors. What happened when they tried to observe the Sabbath? The oppression got worse. Is that going to happen at the end of time? You better believe it. When God's people came out of Egypt, the crescendo of Pharaoh's rage reached its peak, and he made one last attempt to recover the subjects that he had lost. The people must submit to his authority or be what? Or be killed. Does that sound familiar? Pharaoh hedged the Israelites in, and there appeared to be no escape. The people feared that the armies of Pharaoh would kill them. We know this because they complained that Moses had taken them out to the wilderness for them to perish, according to Exodus 14 and verse 12. The location of the crossing was not where it traditionally is thought. You know, it's thought that they actually went south to the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. Really, the land where Israel went to Mount Sinai was actually in Arabia, in northwestern Saudi Arabia. The Apostle Paul makes that clear in Galatians chapter 4. He says Sinai is in Arabia. So where would they have to cross to get from Egypt to Arabia? They would have to cross the Gulf of Aqaba. Super deep. Because scholars say, well, you know, this was really the Sea of Reeds. It was like a marsh. And so they crossed the marsh. But really, they crossed where it was deepest. They crossed there at the Gulf of Aqaba. Notice Exodus chapter 14 and verse 3. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land, and the wilderness has closed them in. In other words, there's no escape for them. Ellen White described their predicament in Patriarchs and Prophets 283 and 284. The Hebrews were encamped beside the sea, whose waters presented a seemingly impassable barrier before them, while on the south a rugged mountain obstructed their further progress. In other words, they had no escape. They were caught in the wilderness, and Pharaoh said, they will be easy prey. So now Pharaoh begins to prepare for the battle. Armageddon, if you please. It's not called Armageddon in Exodus, but that's what it symbolizes. So he prepares for battle, and the story is in Exodus 14 and verses 5 through 9. Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also he took 600 choice chariots. Talk about overreacting with the people who had no weapons. And all the chariots of Egypt, with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth before Baal-zephon. So does it appear like they're caught and they're going to be destroyed? Yes, there's no escape. Did God's people go through a severe time of trouble? Notice Exodus 14 and verse 10. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes and beheld the Egyptians and marched after them. So they were very afraid. And the children of Israel did what? They cried out to the Lord. Is that what God's people are going to do during the final time of trouble? Absolutely. But the Lord promised to fight for them. Interesting. The battle was not Israel's. It was the battle of the Lord God Almighty, as we find in Revelation about the battle of Armageddon. In fact, the Lord promised to fight for Israel. And he just said, you just trust me. Is this righteousness by faith in verity? Trusting the Lord implicitly? Yes, in that sense, the third angel's message, Ellen White says, is righteousness by faith in verity. But it's not dealing with the mere imputation of Christ's righteousness. It's dealing with the imputation of Christ's righteousness that leads to faithfulness. Exodus 14, 13, and 14. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Michael shall stand up. That great prince who stands watch over the children of your people. There will be a time of trouble, but God's people will be what? Delivered. Everyone who is found written in the book. When all appeared to be lost, the Lord dried up or divided the waters of the Red Sea. Does that kind of ring a bell, drying up of waters and dividing waters? We just noticed it in the sixth plague. See, we have to look at terminology. We have to look at the connections. It's typology. What happened locally and literally is going to happen globally at the end of time. As long as the waters were united, this is an important point, they were a menace to God's people. But when the waters are dried up or the waters are divided, the waters become helpful to God's people. Do they not? Let's read Exodus 14 and verse 16 and verse 21. God says to Moses, but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and what? Divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on what? Dry ground. This is a drying up of the waters of the Red Sea, through the midst of the sea. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. Just like at the end, the waters are dried up, the waters of the symbolic Euphrates, the waters of the Red Sea dried up to prepare a way of escape for God's people. Was it the drying up of the waters that provided a way of escape for God's people? Absolutely. Now, what about this issue of the fifth, sixth, and seventh plagues? Now it's going to really get exciting. Let's notice Exodus 14, 19, and 20. Remember what the fifth plague was? Darkness, right? Sixth plague, the drying up of the waters, right? Seventh plague, lightnings, thunderings, earthquake, precipitation from heaven. That's a sequence. Notice Exodus 14, 19, and 20. The people are at the edge of the Red Sea. Pharaoh and his armies are coming after them. There appears to be no hope. And it says in verse 19, and the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. In other words, it was leading them, now it moves over their heads and goes behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one. To whom was it a cloud and darkness? To the Egyptians. And it gave light by night to the other, so that one did not come near the other all that night. Light among God's people, darkness upon the wicked Egyptians. Would that be equivalent to the fifth plague? Absolutely. Notice this statement from Ellen White, Patriarchs and Prophets 286 and 287. But now, as the Egyptian host approached them, expecting to make them an easy prey, the cloudy column rose majestically into the heavens, passed over the Israelites, and descended between them and the armies of Egypt. A wall of darkness interposed between the pursued and their pursuers. The Egyptians could no longer discern the camp of the Hebrews and were forced to halt. But as the darkness of the night deepened, the wall of cloud became a great light to the Hebrews, flooding the entire encampment with the radiance of day. And so now God is going to take the battlefield. This is the battle of the great God Almighty. That's what the Battle of Armageddon is referred to as, by the way. As the sun was about to rise, we're at the bottom of page 46. As the sun was about to rise, God took the battlefield on behalf of Israel. Confusion and panic suddenly overtook the armies of the Egyptians. And they forgot about pursuing God's people, by the way, and they began to flee. In fighting the people of God, the Egyptians were fighting the God of the people. This battle was the battle of the Lord God Almighty. It was not the battle of Israel. It's like when Saul was on the road to Damascus. You know, a voice from heaven says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And Saul says, wait a minute, is Damascus in heaven? Might have thought that because the voice was coming from heaven. He was going to Damascus. Why? He was persecuting the Christians. And then you know the voice said, in that you are persecuting my people, you're persecuting me. Whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye. In that you did it to one of these, the least, my brethren, you did it unto me, the Bible says. Notice Exodus chapter 14, 24 and 25. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians. This is a serious thing when the Lord looks down. Through the pillar of fire and cloud. And what did he do? He troubled the army of the Egyptians. So now he's going to distract them from destroying God's people, and he's going to actually cause a panic among them. Verse 25. And he took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, see, they got the point now, that they weren't fighting Israel. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. So we need to make sure that we're on the Lord's side, folks. Now what about the sixth plague, the drying up of the waters, the dividing of the waters? That also is found in this story. As the Egyptian armies began to retreat, Moses extended his rod as they're in the sea. Moses extends his rod, and the waters of the Red Sea are what? Dried up. Any connection with the sixth plague of Revelation, the waters drying up? Waters that were united before? In the Old Testament, we're dealing with the literal. In the end of time, with the symbolic. So they were dried up or they were divided. Both words are used. And did this prepare the way for the arrival of the kings from the east? You say, who are the kings from the east? We'll get that in a moment. Up to this point, the waters have been a menace to God's people. As long as the waters were united, there was no escape. Notice Exodus 14, verse 16 and verse 21. God says to Moses, but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and what? Here's the key word, divide it. Remember that Babylon was divided into three parts? And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground. Was a way prepared for the escape of God's people? That's in the sixth plague as well. So it says, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. After God dried up the waters, or divided them, here comes an additional point, the waters then became inimical to whom? To the Egyptians. The waters that were a support to the Egyptians, were they a support for the Egyptians? As long as they were united? Yes. But now the waters that were a support to the Egyptians become what? Enemies of the Egyptians. I hope you're catching the picture. It's amazing. This is the backdrop of the sixth plague. So notice Exodus 14, verse 25. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, and that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots, and on their horsemen. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and now notice what moment it was, when the morning appeared. In other words, at the sun rising, this is happening, at the sun rising. You say, why is that important? Because in Revelation chapter 16, where it says to prepare the way for the kings from the east, the word east does not catch the nuance of the Greek, because in the Greek, actually it's two words, not one. It's Anatole Heliu, which should be translated from the rising sun. When are God's people delivered in the sixth plague? When the kings from the rising sun come. When was Israel delivered? When the sun rose. You see, all of these are connections that say, hey, the typology, don't miss the typology. We're not only dealing with history, we're dealing with prophecy. And so it continues saying, verse 27, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. And when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. But the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea. The way was prepared, in other words, for their escape. And the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Who receives the glory here? Oh, we were delivered because we're so good. No, the Lord gets all the glory. None for Israel. Now you say, what about the seventh plague? You remember that in the seventh plague in Revelation you have an earthquake and you have thunder and you have lightning and precipitation? Exodus does not mention those phenomena, but the Psalms do. Let's go to Psalm 77 and verses 15 through 20, which is remembering what happened at the edge of the Red Sea. Here it says, you have with your arm redeemed your people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. The waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you, they were afraid. The depths also trembled. So is it an earthquake? Yes. The clouds poured out water. There you have precipitation from heaven. The skies sent out a sound. Is there thunder in Revelation in the seventh plague? Yes. Your arrows also flashed about. What are God's arrows? Lightning. Is lightning mentioned in the seventh plague of Revelation? Yes. The voice of your thunder was in the whirlwind. The lightnings lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook, which is mentioned also in the seventh plague. Your way was in the sea, your path in the great waters, and your footsteps were not known. You say, well, how do you know that this is referring to what happened at the Red Sea? Notice the following verse, verse 20. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Was there an earthquake at the Red Sea? Yes. Was there thunder? Yes. Was there lightning? Was there precipitation from heaven? Absolutely. And so you have this pattern. The same pattern that you find in the Exodus story is found also at the end of time. Only the difference is that you're dealing in the Old Testament with the literal. In Revelation, you're dealing with the symbolic. Let's read Exodus 14, verse 24 and verse 27. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud. He troubled the army of the Egyptians, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. And when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full strength while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. So the waters dry up, and then the waters do what? they drowned the Egyptians. Notice chapter 14 and verse 28. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. And then what do the people do on the other side of the sea when all their enemies are buried and a way has been prepared for them to escape from their enemies? What do they do when they're on the other shore? Duh, they sing the song of Moses. What are God's people going to sing once they go through the same experience? They're going to sing the song of Moses, because that's the type, and the Lamb, because that's the fulfillment of what the type was pointing to. This is typology. Now, we're going to skip reading this magnificent hymn. I wish somebody would set this hymn to music. We don't know what the music was like. We only have the words. But it'd be beautiful if somebody set this to music. Let me ask you, if somebody set music to this Exodus chapter 15, do you think we would be able to sing it? Yeah. Do you think we would be able to sing it like Israel did? Of course not. Why could they sing it differently than us? Because it's a song of their experience. We were never at the edge of the Red Sea, at the point of being annihilated. The 144,000 can sing this song such as no other group can ever sing it. Now, the redeemed will sing it. It's like Revelation chapter 5, where it says, you have redeemed us from every nation, tongue, and people. You know, people say, oh, so the 24 elders have to be human because they are singing this song. You have redeemed us, and we will be kings on the earth. But Ellen White has a statement where she says that the angels of heaven, including the elders, are going to sing this song. She says they haven't had the experience, but they're still going to sing the song along with God's people. And so God's people will sing this song. And so now we go to page 50. We're not going to be able to say much about Ellen White at this point, the third fulfillment. But let's go to Exodus 15, 17, and 18. Where does God take Israel after he has delivered them from their enemies? He takes them to the promised land. Where is God going to take his people after the final deliverance? To the new Jerusalem in the promised land. Notice Exodus 15, 17, and 18. You will bring them in and plant them. This is the end of the song. And plant them in the mountain of your inheritance. What mountain is that? Zion, where the 144,000 standing on Mount Zion. In the place, O Lord, which you have made for your own dwelling, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established, the Lord shall reign forever and ever. Pharaoh came to realize too late that in fighting the people of God, he was fighting the God of the people. The protecting care of God must be understood in the context of the covenant. When God's people are in a covenant relationship with the Lord protects them from annihilation. When Saul of Tarsus persecuted the church, he was persecuting the Lord. Now let's go to the last point here, which is a vital prophetic principle. Literal Israel was literally captive in literal Egypt to literal Pharaoh. God raised up a literal person, Moses, to lead God's literal people out. Literal Israel was closed in at the edge of the literal sea. The literal waters were divided or dried up by Moses, literal rod, and then the waters literally avalanched themselves upon the enemies to deliver literal Israel. So the Old Testament story is literal and local. Literal Israel then sang what? They sang the song of their deliverance. And God took them to the literal mountain of God's inheritance, literal Mount Zion. But where is Jesus going to take his people after their final deliverance? He is going to take them to the true Mount Zion, the heavenly Zion, where the 144,000 will stand, as well as the redeemed from all ages. Isn't this fascinating? typology. Now let me say one or two things about Ellen White. I don't know whether we should maybe just stop here, but let me just give you some indications so we don't have to come back to this, okay? Skip this part about the methodology because I've already talked about that. I deal with the 24 elders here that I mentioned before. And let's notice how Ellen White comments on the last 3 plagues. And we studied this in an earlier session today. So, when the wicked have proclaimed a death decree against God's people, and it appears that God's people are going to be wiped out, is a plague of darkness going to fall upon the earth? Yes. Does Ellen White say that when the darkness comes, the multitudes that are about to rush on God's people will be suddenly arrested? Does she? Yes. What does that mean? That the multitudes are arrested. It means that they're drying up. They're no longer supporting the religious leaders. And then if you continue reading there in Great Controversy, page 635 and 636, Ellen White mentions the same phenomena. A great earthquake, lightning, thunder, precipitation, the raging sea. She mentions all of those signs that we find in the 7th plague in Revelation chapter 16. What is she doing? She is simply commenting on this experience that we find in the Old Testament. And by the way, a little bit later on in the chapter, The Desolation of the Earth, Ellen White actually quotes the passage that deals with the song of Moses and the Lamb. Clearly, in Great Controversy, she is globalizing and making spiritual the experience that we find in the Old Testament. By the way, you know that eventually the wicked are going to turn on their religious leaders. Not only are they going to withdraw their support, not only are they going to dry up, but they're going to turn against the religious leaders. If you read page 53, this long statement, which we don't have time to read, it says that the people see that they've been deluded. Unfaithful pastors have preached smooth things. They've told people that the law of God was nailed to the cross. And now the multitudes are filled with fury, Ellen White says, because they say, we've been deceived. And she says that they turn upon the false shepherds. Those that admired the false shepherd most will pronounce the most dreadful curses against them. And she says the swords that were supposed to be used to slay God's people will be used to slay their enemies who taught them falsehoods. So not only are the waters going to dry up at the end of time, not only are the multitudes going to withdraw their support from Babylon, but then they are going to do what? Then they are going to avalanche themselves upon their religious leaders to destroy them. So this is a wonderful parallel that God has established.